This isn't good.
We're almost out.
We're almost out of bread. That's it.
Yikes.
And we can't just run to the store and buy bread, can we?
No.
And why is that?
Preservatives and more preservatives.
That's right. You just can't buy good bread in the grocery store anymore. And we don't have a really good bakery close by that makes good sourdough bread.
We would drive 45 minutes one way and stock up on bread and then freeze it in their freezer for like 6 weeks.
And how much were we paying? $6, $7, $8 a loaf for real good authentic sourdough bread.
And I'm sure there's lots of people out there that do bake their own.
That's right.
Like you have learned to do.
That's right. And it's not that hard to do. So what do you think? Let's do a video on how to make sourdough bread.
Let's have a slice.
You want to have a slice of bread?
Sure.
All right. Let's, we're cutting it pretty thin. Oh, dear. Perfect day for making bread. It's windy and rainy outside. Nothing to do out there. What better time to go through the steps of preparing bread to get it baked? And we're making sourdough bread. Early this morning, I fed my sourdough starter. I had fed it last night after getting it out of the refrigerator. It doubled. And I fed it again this morning about, I guess almost 3 hours ago. It doubled. It's actually starting to recede, so I've got to get after this right now. The first thing you need to do is you have to create what's called levain. Levain. It's a French word, and it's a pre-dough of sorts. So what I do is I measure everything using the scale. And we're going to get that started. I'm going to turn the scale on with the glass bowl on there so it's tared. So I have 0 grams showing up on the scale. I'm going to put in 38 grams of whole wheat flour. Tare the scale again. Get it back to 0. I need 38 grams of just regular flour. Tare it again. 76 grams of hot tap water. And then finally, 38 grams of our active sourdough starter. All right, I'm going to turn the scale off. Set this off to the side. Get it all mixed together. And we will set this aside now for probably 5-6 hours and let it work. Now what I like to do, even though I don't need this yet for another 4 to 5 hours, is to put together the main flour for the bread, everything except the water. And so when it comes time to add the water and add the levain, we're ready to go. I've got my own special concoction of flour that I've experimented with that comes up with what we feel is the best flavor and the best consistency for the bread. The amount of ingredients will be listed in the description for this video. 703 grams of regular flour. 703. It's just easier to work in metric. That's why I do that. I'm going to tare the scale. I want 114 grams of whole wheat flour. 51 grams of rye flour. Here the scale. And then finally, a little secret here is to add spelt. And I put in 70 grams of spelt. Spelt is a very nutritious flour. It's a high-grade flour. It has high gluten properties, but it has minerals. It's very beneficial flour to add. And then what I like to do is make sure everything is blended properly. So I do it dry. You wait till it's wet, you don't get a good blend of the different flours. And there you have it. The main flour is mixed together, and we'll come back in a few hours and blend everything together, let it sit some more, and then we'll be ready to start making some dough. It's been about 4 hours since I put the flour mixture together, and we are ready now to add water. I have the bowl sitting on the scale. Just check to make sure it's working. It's tared out to 0. And I am going to add 600 milliliters of fairly warm tap water and stir it into this. I'm just going to dump it in, a couple more. I measured pretty close. Take it off the scale. Mix this up. Always works best to use a soft spatula. These that we have work great. Make sure you get all the flour up off the bottom of the bowl. You have to work underneath it a little bit, likes to sit down there. And it starts to get sticky at this point. Now, with most of the dry flour worked in, I'll wet my hands a little bit. I'll keep my fingers closed, because if you have your fingers open, you get it stuck in between. It gets kind of messy. So keep your hands, just try to work with your palms as much as you can to finish working that flour into the mix. How much moisture you have is very important. Now, things will act differently today because it's just a little bit more humid with all the rain. But I never change the water. I just adjust the flour later when I'm kneading the bread. If I need to stiffen it up. Very seldom is it too dry. And if you've worked with bread, the wetter the dough is, sometimes the stickier and harder it is to work with. That is pretty well blended together. I am going to set this off to the side with a towel resting across the top, and we will come back to it in about an hour. It's been about an hour, just a little bit over, since I mixed up the flour with the water. I'm going to set that on the scale. That tears it out to 0, and we put in 18 grams of salt. And as you will note, it's a very basic recipe. When you make sourdough bread, you have flour, and we try to use very high quality flour. I'm going to add that levain that we made earlier today, that initial pre-dough with some of the flour and the sourdough starter. That is still working, bubbling really well. And then we add 50 milliliters of water. So what I do, I'm going to tear the scale again, and I use whey instead of water. You can substitute whey. We generate a lot of whey when we make yogurt. So I'm going to I warmed it up about 20 seconds in the microwave, so it took the chill off. It sits in the refrigerator. The whey It's just a 1-to-1 substitute for water. You can use 50 milliliters of warm water. The whey gives you a little extra protein. There we have 50 milliliters of whey put in. Take this back off the scale. Put all the ingredients together. Let's mix this. And what I'm trying to do is work that levain into the middle of the dough first so I can be sure I get it distributed evenly throughout. The liquid is easy enough to get in here. Folding it over onto itself to get it worked through. I'm going to wet my hands again. It doesn't stick. And use my hands to finish working the stuff through and get the water worked in. The water will absorb if there's some on the bottom. Again, keeping my fingers together, using my palms, prevents a lot of mess. You can see this is a very moist dough. I will adjust for that during the kneading process, putting flour on the counters to keep it from sticking, and we will end up with just the right moisture content in the dough. Everything down off the sides of the bowl, because when this stuff dries, it is like concrete. Rinse my hands off and set this aside for about a half an hour, and then we will start the folding process. We've had the dough sitting for about a half an hour. We have to do the first of 3 folding operations on the dough. I like to just take a small strainer and use that to sprinkle a little bit of flour on the counter. If you have granite countertops, that helps. It's a nice surface to work on. And I put a little flour off to the side I can grab with my fingers when I need it. In case it starts to get sticky. You need a good scraper here. Rounded edge gets into the bowl really well. Get this in position and dump that dough right on the flour. Still very moist. I'm going to put some flour on my hands before I start working with this because it is very, very wet. Wet dough makes better bread in the end, but it is a little tougher to work with. So I'm getting it spread out. You'll find as we go through this process further and further, it's less and less sticky. You need less and less flour on your hands. But this first go around, pretty moist. All right, we've got that spread out. Take our scraper and roll this together. Work it around. Stretch it again. Again, keep your fingers closed. Don't dig your fingers down in that or they'll be all gummed up. Lay that over the top. Stretch it again. So let it dough off of there. Roll it onto itself. A little more flour, a little more stretch. Fold it over. work it into a ball and drop it into the bowl and let it sit again for another half an hour with the cover on it, and we'll come back and we'll do this again. So there were 4 cycles of fold and stretch, and there'll be 2 more of those, and we will be set to let it sit for a while before we put it in the proofing baskets. It's time for round 2. Put the bread back out of the bowl here. Half an hour has passed. Busy day here today. I had to make tahini. I had to make hummus. We were out of that. We're out of the tahini to make the hummus. And this morning I pulled together a batch of Greek yogurt. So the party never ends. As you can see, the dough is getting much easier to work with. There's one. Stretch that out. And that's 4. Gather it together. And drop it in the bowl. Off to the side and come back to it in another half an hour. Now round 3 of battle with the bread. It actually gets easier each round. You can see the consistency change. It's switchier. That's the gluten going to work. And this process is getting air worked into the dough so that when you bake it, it's nice and open. And there's 1. And that's 2. That's 3. 1 more. You can see it's starting to shape nicely. Drop it in the bowl. Set it off to the side, cover it up, and we come back in a couple of hours now. Divide it up, get it ready to put in the baskets to proof overnight. It's been about 4 hours now total time since I mixed this dough up with the levain and the salt and the water, and then went through that process of folding it those 3 different times. And it sat a couple hours since I did that. So we are ready now to get it out of the bowl and divide it up. This dough will make 2 oval loaves of bread. So I'm going to get it in position here, get it kind of a consistent shape so I can easily divide it in half. And to do that, I take my sharper metal knife, just run right down the center. Got to eyeball it a little bit, but it's pretty close. All you need to do, I'm going to put a little flour on my hands again just to be sure I can get them loose again. Roll this together, shape it into a nice ball with the smooth surface on the top. Same with this one over here. And we are going to leave those sit for about 20 minutes. Come back and do the final step. We're just about there for today's part of the process. Here we are at the last step for today. We don't bake them today, we let them sit overnight. Turn these into oval loaves to fit this oval proofing basket. It's called a petard loaf when it's oval like that. Again, put a little flour on my fingers just to make sure it doesn't stick. I'm going to pull this together. And I've got the nice rounded part up here on the top. That goes into the basket. You take the shape, the pattern of that basket, makes an attractive loaf of bread. Work that down in. And we'll do the same with the other one. A note about the baskets. These are coated with rice flour. Now, I've got these pretty well seasoned, so I'm not going to add any today. The rice flour keeps the loaf from sticking inside of the basket. And the reason we use rice flour, doesn't have the gluten, so it won't bind the loaf to the basket. Let's get this other one into an oval shape. Get it flopped over here and into the basket. Move it around. All right. Then, before we put them in the refrigerator, just a piece of plastic over the top with a rubber band. Seal the moisture in the refrigerator. Now they go into the refrigerator where they will proof overnight, and we will bake the 2 loaves tomorrow. And we can bake those at just about any time we'd like after mid-morning, and we'll do that tomorrow. It's a new day, and it's time to bake the bread dough that we put together yesterday. Before we do that, we have to prepare the oven. Now, when I bake bread, I use a stone. That has to be preheated, and I have a pan in here that when I get ready to put the dough in, I'll fill this with water, and that steam will help keep the crust moist as it bakes. What I need to do now is turn the oven on, preheat it to 480 degrees. Once it hits 480, let it sit for about 45 minutes to make sure that that stone is heated all the way through and the oven has a nice even temperature. And we'll put the bread dough in and bake some bread. My timing assistant just informed me that the 45-minute preheat is done. That means the oven's hot, stone is hot. So I brought the bread into the house. You leave the bread dough in the refrigerator until you're ready to put it into the oven. You don't want it out earlier setting. You want to keep it cold. And we're going to transfer the dough onto these 2 pieces of parchment paper that are sitting on the back side of a baking sheet. And I'll explain why I do that once I start to put this in the oven. There's one and the other. Get these out of the way. Another important step is we need to slit those on the top. They make special razors for doing this. I just use a paring knife. It always seems to work. That relieves some of the escaping steam so that you don't split the bread where you don't want it to be split. This will basically heal up on the inside as it bakes. With that done, we're ready to put some water in the pan and slide these into the oven. First thing I'm going to do, I open this door, pothole it very carefully, pull this bottom rack out with the pan where the water will be. There'll be some steam here. Yeah. That full of water, most of that will boil away. Carefully close this up. Now I'm going to close this again for a second so I don't let all the heat out while I get ready to position the bread in there. Now you'll see why I have the cookie sheet with the 2 pieces of parchment paper. This is quite a process. I have to pull this out far enough that I can get to the stone. I'm going to take my cookie sheet, rest the edge on here, take this spatula, and guide the bread onto the stone. Keep them far enough apart that they don't weld together while they're baking. Get this out of the way. Now, I'm going to grab my secret weapon, an old turkey roasting pan. Use it every time. This goes on the top. Keep the moisture in during the first part of the baking. Push it back in and shut the door. After getting the bread dough into the oven, I proceeded to set a timer for 20 minutes. When the 20 minutes are up, I'm going to turn the oven down to 370 and let it bake a little while longer with the top on, and then take the top off with maybe 10 minutes left to bake, and that will let the crust brown a little bit. The timer went off, so I turned the oven down to 370. It'll stay at 370 for another 25 minutes. Now in 15 minutes, I'm going to pull that aluminum top off from the bread, and then let it bake for the final 10 minutes with the top off to brown the crust a little bit. See, the time is up for having the cover on. Let's take a pair of tongs, reach in here, grab it, set it up out of the way. Bread looks nice and brown on the top. We'll let it finish baking. Time is up, and I actually added a couple of minutes after that because the bread needed to brown just a little bit more. And you'll find at times, depending on the weather, you'll have to adjust things depending on the moisture of the bread. So I look, and we are ready to take the bread out. So what I do now, my cookie sheet ready. Pull this out where I can get at it. Set the cookie sheet down. It's lined up. And I simply slide the bread off from the cookie sheet. Move it over to the counter. Close this up, turn it off, and let it cool. With the bread out of the oven, we will pick it up and move it over to the cooling rack. And we'll let it sit for a couple hours to cool really well. Check it out. Beautiful sound. Now we'll check this bread a little bit later on today and see how it turned out. How do they look to you?
They look lovely. Very nice. Nice color, nice shape, nice height.
Yeah, now we'll see if they turned out all right inside. Let's just take a end off here and then cut a nice slice. Oh, it cuts nice. That looks pretty good so far.
Yeah, yes. Smells good.
Oops, I'm cutting the wrong direction. There we go. Slots on the board. You can't cut into the slot. Let's put a little butter on that. See what we have.
Okay. Magically.
All right.
Yummy.
It's done. That's right.
It is.
Well, good. Well, we've got bread again for the next week.
Yay.
Well, that's a good thing. Okay. And you noticed I went through a lot of steps to make this bread, but yet both days, in between steps, I was able to do a lot of other things. I was working in the yard. I did some painting. I installed a camera.
Yeah, you did all
sorts of things. So it doesn't have to take up your whole day. There's a lot of letting it sit, letting it work, come back to it. Like today, baking it. So I come back, I check when the time is right, put this in, take this out, do whatever, and we've got bread.
And now what we'll do is one loaf will go in the fridge,
right?
In plastic, and the other loaf will go in the freezer.
And something else, and you can look this up, even without preservatives, sourdough bread tends to keep longer on the shelf than regular bread. It doesn't have all that stuff in it. So if you like sourdough bread, and you have a hard time finding it or tired of paying the high price for it, give this a shot. It's not hard to do, and it gives you a really nice loaf of bread.
Sourdough.
All right,
Good job.
Let's enjoy. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what other things you'd like to see us do. So until next time, thanks, and see you later.
Bye for now.